going to have the panel kind of do a quick introduction of themselves, and then we're going to talk about green. And there's a lot of definitions of green. I'm sure we've all heard green data center, green IT, green computing, everything from power management to virtualization, and everybody wants to be green. The question is, how real is this? How much of it is hype? And which direction should we be headed in and paying some attention to? And please feel free to chime in from the audience. So, Alan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. I'm Alan Cullup. I'm the CIO with NetJets. I would say from a green perspective, about 4 years ago, I got a bumper sticker that said "Save the Planet," stuck it to the back of my Yukon, and thought I was ready. So I didn't know a heck of a lot about being green. About 2.5 years ago, essentially the idea about being more green came to us. Really, at the end of the day, I'm a capitalist, and there just didn't seem to be a giant ROI in the whole green discussion there for a while. There definitely is one of the encouraging things, and I think a lot of us have come to know that as we get more into it. But really, the pressure came from our European company. They were obviously sort of well ahead of us in terms of this country, in terms of thinking about being green, renewable resources, those kind of things. And just to back up for a few seconds, NetJets is the world's largest aircraft operator in terms of number of planes operated. So we're responsible for a little CO2 going out there. So and we sell essentially fractional shares of business jets. So the goal for our European company was to essentially become carbon neutral by 2012. This was about 2.5 years ago. So we took a 5-year approach to becoming carbon neutral. I think, which was an interesting journey, since we all looked around and said, other than we all had matching bumper stickers, no one really at the company knew a heck of a lot about being green. We went out and hired an expert, who was a guy named Dan Esty, and he's a professor with Yale and sort of a industry expert in the space of being green, and we asked him for some advice and help essentially on what to do. And he said, well, break it down into really 5 areas, which he broke it down into guidance, which we were getting from him, oddly enough, but actually he recommended several others, into technology. And that became sort of my area as the IT guy. Technology tends to land on my desk. And then we had organization, offsets, and then finally review. So that was essentially, and I'll elaborate a little more across the session on what those are, but I don't want to kind of drone on and on.
Probably heard enough from me already, Mark Hinckley. And Joanne, I don't mean to ask questions, but something I'd like to discover with the panel and the audience is green table stakes, or is it a value differentiator? Where do we stand at this point in time? It's good. It's an interesting question for me, because as I go out and talk to customers and folks like yourselves on sales calls, we talk about what we can do to enhance their green position and the value in that. But I've heard some comments from execs who say, well, look, it's not a differentiator. It's the way you have to do things today. So I'd be curious, as we get through the discussion, your opinion on that.
Morning again. Albert Schneider, IBM. When I think of green, I think of socially and environmentally responsible. And then I think of fiscally prudent. Are kind of the 2 ways I go. And then it also begins to allow you to address real constraints that you have in how you approach green. But, for me, it's relatively simple in terms of how I think about it. It's, efficiency, so it ties back to virtualization from the cloud and virtualization discussion. It's some novel new ideas. Whether it's on the technology side, whether it's on the data center layout side. And so hopefully we'll get into some of those discussions.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to ask for a show of hands. How many people think it's table stakes, to Mark's question? Okay, and so the rest of you all think it's not table stakes. So I'd like to hear from some folks that think it is table stakes, why you think so. So, Larry, you had your hand up.
I think we certainly see more and more, on the one hand, we see more customers looking at being a corporate social.
Great point. Anybody else that thinks it's table stakes that wants to add a comment?
Well, if I could augment Larry's comment, that is.
You can't power it, and you can't find the people to manage it, which is going to cause you to go look for ways to get green. So the U.S. is going to be driven totally by
Bill, you wanted to?
Yeah, so I was just curious. I mean, part of to follow up on the last comment, part of what we're dealing with right now and trying to define green is around externalities. And right now you can, well, externalization of cost, I should say. When you define your cost structure in such a way that you can externalize costs, like social costs, cost of the environment, cost to Costa Rica that you end up ruining if you put your cell phone, your dead cell phones there, things like that. It seems like at some point, a lot of the things that we do that or want to do that are green actually are economically advantageous, but it depends on how you draw the lines around what you keep score on. And I was curious about, what your thoughts on that are and what trends you see and how those lines are getting drawn. Clearly, there's legislation that's about to come up that may help that along as well.
I would say from a trends perspective, I would say that, certainly there is a greater social awareness. So I agree with Thornton's comment that, we had certain clients that were coming to us and asking us about, and are saying, what were your green strategies? This was 2.5, 3 years ago. We did not make the program mandatory in terms of becoming carbon neutral for the U.S. companies. Quite honestly, for the reason of, if you want to purchase carbon offsets to get there, which is essentially at this stage the only way that you're going to get there in the short term flying a jet, is to essentially buy the offsets to neutralize the carbon that that the aircraft are currently emitting. That's a decision that you've got to take, and it's one that adds cost. So I concur that, I think a lot of the people who have taken the decision to become green, didn't do so because, I think that they were, that zealot about the cause. They did so because there was a business return for whatever business they happen to be in. Now, that's not 100% true, as with any statement. We do have some owners that, quite honestly, are wealthy enough and just care about the planet at this point, and don't want to essentially leave a carbon footprint. So, but by and large, I think for most corporations, the reason why they're in is because their customer base is demanding it, or a regulatory body is demanding it.
Albert, do you want to?
I mean, in general, I agree with everything that's been said. The other reason is clearly financial motivation, but it really, for me, as I said in some opening remarks, it's either and it's probably fair to say European, or as a general comment, you have communities wherever they are that is important too. And so they will look for, we talked before about scoring. Would we have scoring for the cloud? I actually would see we'd have scoring for being green before we'd have scoring for something like the cloud. And then you'd have some type of measure as to how much are you green. IBM deals a lot with the government. They do a fair amount of scoring. How accessible are you with people with special needs? How this are you, et cetera, et cetera. I see that as one of the things that they will look to do more and more going forward. And again, that will then motivate, businesses to do that as well. I'm kind of the mind, I don't necessarily care how you get there. I think it's a good thing as well. Some will get there on the social side, some will get there on the financial side, some will get there because they're shut out of a market because you need to be this amount green before you can even participate. So, I mean, I do see it evolving to that.
No, I know there's scorecards there, but I'm thinking we had the problem, and I think our colleague from Pearson is like, I mean, can we trust the rating agency? Can we trust the people who are doing the scorecards? Or, and are we comfortable with it?
No money the motivation of each rating the teacher is basically going to get a percentage of your salary when you graduate. Maybe your grade will be better.
Yeah, and Paul, go ahead. Go ahead.
And does it really matter? I mean, because there needs to be some point where you start. As an example, about 6 weeks ago, Newsweek did a cover story on the top 50 or top 100 greenest companies in the United States, right? They use their own scorecard. And I don't think it makes any difference, right? Because as long as you establish a baseline to start from, at that point standardization does start to occur, but you have to start somewhere. So as long as it's not a hardware company or a consulting company that has a fiscal interest in creating a rating, I think it's completely irrelevant where these ratings are coming from.
Yeah, I was actually going to add, right before that, it was good lead in. I haven't seen anything that's specific to standardization of what it means to be green. You have councils like LEED and leadership and environmental design. You have things where there's standardization of elements you can employ to be more green. But, in my recent travels, I've seen CIOs tell me that recycling paper cups in the water through the fountains in the corporate plaza is a form of going green. I've had others say, well, no, it's about virtualization of a 20% utilized network server that I can put 3 instances on a single box and save the economy there. So I haven't seen anything that I would hang my hat on as an industry metric for what it means to be green. A great example is most of you are probably familiar with the EPA Energy Star 4.0, 5.0 is just about here or already here. If you look at the amount of networking equipment, things in the IT world that are covered by EPA, it's like this. We're just starting to get support for gaming devices, PC workstations. We'll start with monitors. But when you look at the data center compute device, when you look at the power grids in your data centers, when you look at your Ethernet switches in your desktop devices, we don't have provisions for that. So even within the the EPEAT standards and the EPA, we don't have a consistent scorecard. So that's why I asked that question about, is it a differentiator? And how would you decide how much of a differentiator it is? I think that most execs would go for the economic benefit of doing things that not only are better because you go green, but it also helps your PR position. You're demonstrating behaviors. And a lot of the new technologies, if you look at the way the technologies are built, the way we build products today, as an example, an Ethernet switch, we used to have, if there's a cable plugged in, there's power on, you get a link. You're burning power. But there's software mechanisms now that actually go out to the ASICs that control those ports and actually shut those down. Gaming consoles, they have LAN on demand, LAN standby, so that the only time they power up the Ethernet connectivity is when they sense traffic. So there's a lot of things that are happening. There's advances in chip design. I was riddling Albert with high K dielectrics. He said, "Don't." He said, "Anytime you can figure out a way to bring high K dielectrics into an executive discussion, it's a good thing." But so I translated that to "Don't do it."
Yeah, and the EPA actually has published some standards in regards to data center efficiency. So there's metrics about power in versus computing produced, and then there's metrics also that they've recommended about computing in. Because as you think about your data center, in terms of power from the power plant, 100% produced at the plant, about 70% lost in transmission getting it to you through the infrastructure. You've got about 30% of the energy produced once it hits your data center. You lose about 15% typically on cooling. You lose about the remaining 14% or so on getting it to the processors, and the processors eat less than 1% of the power, which are actually doing the computing work and actually, producing the stuff that adds value as a result of IT. So there's some calculations that they've recommended in there as well. Now, will those get accepted and standardized, and will that become sort of the basis? I think they've begun to set those ground rules, which is sort of, I think, interesting from a scorecard as well. I mean, we set it up 2.5 years ago when there was no scorecards, but we just said, we're going to measure how much power is coming in, how much does the meter spend this month, and then as a result of our efforts, we're going to track that monthly and see what happens to the meter spinning in regards to the data center and the efforts that we're putting forth. And I think you attack that from multiple fronts. We attack that from all of the hardware, virtualization, getting smarter about taking, silly things occur. If you actually look at how your data center operates, the equipment wants DC power. DC power is actually very efficient. It comes in as alternating current. We convert it to DC power, then back to alternating current, then back to DC power. Take the conversion to alternating out of the mix. You can actually buy equipment that that you can go DC straight all the way through, and that's knocks 10 to 30% out of your data center. So there's a number of things you can do, when you get into the guts of how your data center operates. It's easy things, cheap things as well, redirecting your cooling, consolidating. We consolidated all of our high-density virtualized stuff into a specific area. We put cooling doors on the back of that equipment. That reduced the cooling load by about 45%. I mean, these are huge, numbers in terms of, how you can take the cooling down by, sort of getting to the hot spots and eliminating them. But then we also looked at the other side of this, because I do software development, and a lot of it based on the industry that I'm in. So, it was essentially, how obese is our code, right? In other words, what are we doing in the space, in other words, because unfortunately, IT people never, they were all like me, parking their Yukons beside me, apparently. And so essentially, we never really thought about, energy was sort of like turning on water or whatever, it was there, it was readily available, and it was always going to be that way. So, we built rather paranoid, chatty applications that like to, if they don't get a ping back, something obviously must be wrong. And so there's all of these things that we inherently built into the code to make the code less efficient or less energy efficient than it needs to be as well. So I encourage people to take a look at that, and obviously, that's going to translate to the people you buy packaged products from as well. As you think about how you're green, and what their standards are, how does that code translate?
Okay, so a question I'd like to ask is we've talked about scorecards and sort of seen it from, virtualization and different steps we can take and processes we can have, but to tie it back to what Michael talked about last night, what about the value to your customer? So coming from an educational institution, there's a lot of pressure from the next generation about being green, having everything sustainable across the board. And so to some sense, I'd like to see what you think about the fact that your customers are actually going to drive that scorecard. They're going to be doing it in social networking. That's the message that's going to get out there. So all these things that you're doing on the back end might save money, they might increase efficiencies, and they're nice. But really, how do you see the social networking tools tying to the value add to the customer of being green, or is that for real or not?
I think it is for real. I think we will see, as I mentioned, more scoring, more types of scoring. You have, things on appliances today, Energy Star, simple things. Already in the data center, you have the beginning of some standardization. You have energy certificates, which you can apply for when you do different things in there. So I think it lends itself to a number of metrics that people will begin to bring forward, people will begin to decide. In terms of the customers, I agree. I mean, that's one of the primary motivations. I mean, not only do I think it's an opportunity to save money where possible, but I think it's a good marketing tool. I mean, if for nothing else. And that's where you want some level of standardization. I mean, today, if you look at foods as an example, healthy. What does that mean? Well, what is the standard for healthy on something? Low fat. I mean, all these different things on there. You really don't have a standardized way of doing that. But, when I look at the product, well, that appeals to me, healthy, low fat. But I don't know what that means. Is low fat just less than the really fat version? I don't know what that, et cetera. So I think you'll see some of that pop up as well when I'm, energy efficient, I'm more than I was, type of stuff. But I also think it's going to extend, with compute systems to, for instance, what we saw last night. The lights went off at a certain time, right? I mean, that's a form of being green, energy efficient, doing that. I love the example you mentioned, power. You're right, a very high percentage of power is lost in transmission, notion of smarter grids and things of that nature. With, infrastructure itself, the notion of turning on and off, whether it's a port, whether it's a component, a processor, whatever it would be, I think more and more you will see those, novel technology things find themselves into green solutions.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I think it just needs to be measurable. I think that if IT executives can take actions that are measurable in some form and go back and maybe create their own scorecard, but be able to go back and show the constituents, this is what we've done. These are the concrete things that we've done. This is how we've changed our behaviors. As a technology, as a plumbing infrastructure vendor, I can tell you that there's a choice. When you select something, we talk about Ethernet switches, they're commodities. But when you look at the way these products are built, the type of chips that they have and the way the software structures work, are they centralized architectures, broadcast architectures, do they have secondary processors or not? What type of silicon do they use? You can make decisions that will give you a measurable cost savings There's a host of modeling tools. I'm sure IBM has some. I know we have some. I know the consultancies have some that can help you plan and measure out. You were talking about the additive effect of power. We've got statistics that show that for every watt consumed at the edge of the network for a connectivity device, whether that's an IP phone or an access point or whatever, the Ethernet port, it's really 2.74 watts of actual energy required to provide that because of the losses that you had talked about. So there's things that you can take a look at, and it's really just about having a measurement, Joanne. I think if you go back to your community and say, this is what we've done, and it can be, it could be a good thing to recycle paper cups. If you find that this is a way that you can eliminate landfill collection, if it's a way that you can have a cost savings, if it's a way that the students coming into the university feel good about what you're doing here at Olin, I think that it works. So it's a combination of things.
Yeah, I also think that in terms of the social tools, our collaboration tools. There's a green element just within them themselves, right? We can connect people from far away without having to expend the energy to try, to have folks. At one point, if you wanted to have a meeting, we all had to come together in a forum like this. You don't have to do that with the social networks and the ability that we have to collaborate now. So technology is sort of enabling that. I would say you can throw video conferencing into that mix as well. But I look at all of those as sort of collaboration tools. To echo what my two colleagues were saying here, I think that just like we bake security in, that's a part, in other words, the way my IT team is organized is, my architecture team comes up with the plans and the way, and then my development team is tasked with following the way, ultimately. Just like security is in the mantra of how we build things, so is being efficient in terms of how we build the software and also how we architect the hardware. Are we buying the chips? Are we putting in are we designing things in a way that are going to be the most energy efficient? Which is just a mindset change. So I started out 2.5 years ago and I called it, we formed the green team. And in other words, you've just got to get your folks. And quite honestly, if you hire good people, which I'm sure all of us have and have done, get them motivated, get them some targets and some goals, and sit back and they'll make you proud. Because every quarter we come together and have a good readout on progress, and they're amazing me with the things that they come up with.
Okay, so one question I have for the audience is, I'm sorry, Rajiv, did you?
Any one of you evaluated a product for measuring the carbon footprint in your organization? There are several products in the market. Have you evaluated any product, and is there an opinion on those?
Oh, you're near the speaker. So have you evaluated any product that's in the market, and do you have an opinion of those?
Yeah, I think in terms of determining what the carbon footprint was, we actually essentially, through working with Mr. Estes, he essentially did that work for us and modeled it. And that's how we set the goals essentially on how, what being carbon neutral was going to equate to, because that was the goal. In other words, it's mandatory that if you buy a share in Europe, you're buying the, wrapped up in the price point of that purchase, you're buying the carbon offsets. And then we took it upon ourselves to, suck up or figure out the cost to get the business carbon neutral in terms of the office and the, the back office functions. So it's all the, all of the things that go into that, which they are starting to finally make some Energy Star or whatever. We started out with printers. Those were one of the first things that came out that, were finally, sort of equipment that would go to sleep. And then the monitors are about 45% more efficient today than they were even 5 years ago. So, there's a number of things that we're doing there. I would say another thing that we've done sort of additionally that I looked at technology, that's sort of all the stuff that I think sort of sits in the house of what a company can do. There's also just looking at the greater marketplace and what's available from a technology perspective. We essentially are funding Fred Dreyer in his efforts at Princeton University to come up with a very low emissions jet fuel as well. So which is something that I was very involved with, because I look at technology more holistically. It's what can we do in and what can we do out to affect the marketplace, leveraging technology. And he was making some strides working with the Air Force, and certainly more funding doesn't hurt his efforts, and he was very receptive, and is actually making very, very good progress in terms of making a jet fuel. And one of the reasons why I liked what he was doing was he'd done some successful work with automotive fuels. And it seemed very logical that he had the good skill sets and a great team at Princeton to sort of carry that on. And he's actually making some great progress.
Did you have a question? So the question was, how do you mandate behavior? So this goes back to some of the behavior change we talked about, and Rajiv gave the example.
Rating agencies. Just yesterday, a startup in the Bay Area sued Gartner for their Magic Quadrant. There's a $1.3 billion.
Yes.
Everybody's so happy you should join in. It's a class act. Maybe.
So anybody that wants to help Sue Gardner, see Rajiv, okay, during lunch. Do you folks want it, Albert?
I don't think you can mandate it. I think it's extremely difficult to mandate it. I think, again, if you link back to social networking, one of the things people would publish studies like that. So it's really more, I think, through increased awareness that then has some impact on the business. If you see something published that says a Google search of this costs that, a Ask search costs this, I think that begins to have some level of effect. The notion of mandating is just so difficult. You almost have to begin removing, as opposed to me having it here available for you to use but telling you can't use it. That just doesn't work.
But can you put it in the budget? Every time you do a search, it costs your IT budget something.
And again, I think, back to how do you measure some of this, the scoring aspect of this. So actually one of the things we're doing with cloud is now based on this usage-based billing, is we actually then tell people what does it cost to do these things. So we start with that in the enterprise. I call it a paper bill, because just the way the IBM works, it is just too difficult right now. We're not set up to have all of these different transactions within the company go back and forth. So we begin to model that as if you were individuals using a public service, and that actually helps us align budgets as we would go into the next year. So that's the beginnings of how we would do that.
I could just add one thing from sort of the Olin experience. So students in printing, we don't charge our students to print. Most other colleges think we're out of our mind because we don't do that. But essentially what we've done is put the cost per copy, and we've gone away from all the desktop printing to the network printing. Now that doesn't necessarily work particularly for all the VPs who are used to having one near their desk, but for the most part, we don't support personal local printers. We drive people to the network printers, and we basically put the costs up for the students, and then we've actually done how much we've saved over the last year. We've set things to duplex and have a student group around sustainability that helps drive these changes through the students, and then therefore when the students adopt it, frankly, we get the faculty to go along with them because they kind of push that up the food chain. But I think this whole piece about education and what does it really cost to do something and what are the implications, particularly in the education space, makes a difference. And it may not make a difference for every single student, but across the board, the peer pressure or the social networking kinds of tools around the behavior, like, hey, the students put together this book of paper that they sat next to the printer from all the unpicked up print jobs. They were ready to let us go to secure printing where they had to punch in a code to pick up their job. And when the students saw that bunch of paper, it changed behavior. So I think there is some value into the education piece. And Alan, did you have something? I thought you didn't know if you were nodding.
I was just nodding. We've done this.
I mean, but even, we begin to do, I'll call it some internal competition. I mean, when I started with IBM, I started in sales. There was 600 and some odd branch offices. They were ranked 1 to 623, I think the number was. You took some pride in where you were on that list. Internally, we look at different metrics. You know, what division? Is systems group more green than software group? Is this, so, you know, and again, it gets back to this social responsibility aspect of that, and just pride in, can, you know, you achieve something better, and if it's the right goal you're trying to achieve, you know, normally it's helpful. But, you know, the notion of mandating, it just becomes extremely difficult, again, to the extent you allow them to do something, trying to tell them they can't. I mean, me telling my child, you know, that you can't have another cookie when the cookie jar's there and they can open up whenever they want, it doesn't work too well.
Steve?
Authorities or public?
So the question is, as a CIO, what type of infrastructure are you going to put in place to be able to capture what's likely to be a mandatory reporting requirement in terms of your carbon footprint?
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done right now with instrumentation and machine-to-machine collection of information. You know, the smart data center, you know, again, the example with the lights. But there's a lot more automation that's happening. Today, what we do at my company is, you know, working with customers, we have modeling tools similar to what you had mentioned. And the modeling tools are based on, you know, rates for commercial power in different cities and things like that. But it's a modeling tool that goes and gets static information, and it gives you, you know, an estimate. In terms of real-time collection, the technologies themselves are evolving to a point where you can start to report back on what systems are doing. I know that we're doing research on thermal signature and looking within a data center and look at, you know, what shelves, what blades, what racks, how much power consumption are they using, and could you vary the load? And this is where virtualization, you know, ties into this directly. What will the future systems be in the automation that take processing? You know, if you've got one server that's got 60% cycle available, and you've got another job running on a server where you're only using 10%, what automation exists to vary that load onto the other server and then report back to you what savings there was or what the carbon footprint. There'll be calculations based on, you know, how much power it saved and how exactly the meter spins and you clock each device. I don't know, but I know that there's a lot of activity going on in that space for automation and tracking that information. But today, you know, I've seen it done mostly with modeling tools, predictive type software.
So I think that was an attempt to try and get an answer to your first question in part. I don't think you got a good answer to your first question. What are the products that are used? I don't personally know. I know our facilities team does use some products. I believe some are purchased third party. I just don't know what they are. Some are developed internally. I do think that you will begin to see in some of these products the instrumentation that will begin to bring some of that to light. And some will use that as a differentiator. It will not be overly standardized initially. I think it will ultimately get to that over time. But you will see, you know, utilization statistics, energy statistics. I do believe you will begin to see that. I know some of the products that we have, we're beginning to see that as well. Find its way into the software, the firmware, as well as some of these. So that's how I think it will start.
There are aggregated products.
Yeah, no, I'm just not aware of them. Yeah, and I do know we use some.
There is a product called Power.
So the question is around the whole concept of smart and who's going to be driving all the smartness, if you will, in the network. Is that not just the network and just in... Okay.
You want to?
Yeah, I got a quick comment, but go ahead.
So I see IT partnering, but I don't necessarily see them leading per se. I mean, I think it's with governments. I think it's with large, power deliverers and producers. I think you will see companies, IBM happens to be one, that will see that as an opportunity. We right now, I think, with 26 different, either cities or countries, et cetera, are working on some form of smart grid. And whether it's power, whether it is, smart grids for other things, congestion, et cetera, I mean, I do see that is an opportunity to begin to do things like that. But I really do have to think it's the municipalities themselves, it's the big power provider, they're the ones who are really going to have to buy into this, and then they'll partner with others, and then you'll see little startups, come up that will try and take advantage of this opportunity.
I was just going to say it's not necessarily a comprehensive response, but things that I'm seeing now is if I look at the way just in convergence, the way voice and data teams within large corporations came together. If you look at the way networking and the true IT, the application groups are now coming together in this world of unified communications, we're starting to see the foundation for IT and facilities maybe not come together, but collaborate much more tightly. And I think that collaboration today, where the IT network architect and designer, these are the requirements for my data center, whether it's green or whether it's dirty, this is what I need. And then those facilities folks go out and make provisions for and get that power. I think as the collaboration comes together, where now there's kind of co-ownership, co-accountability for what's the overall impact, then you have a better leverage to go to the actual utilities and the grid operators for how you get your power and what type of requirement you have. So I'm starting to see that whole facility / networking IT space collaborate much tighter than they ever did before.
I agree. I think in order to accomplish this, we certainly had to partner very closely with facilities in order to capture and understand, to establish the benchmarks, to set our measurements, to know how much power we were consuming, to divide all of those things. And then, but I think ultimately what drives it to the next level is, it will be the public, or ultimately then, a voice for the public is at some point in time there becomes government regulations that mandate. So I think all of that is coming, but, as more and more people become conscious or aware of the power consumptions, those type of things, you're starting to see those innovations and features show up in the products that people are trying to sell. And they're not doing it, again, because they're great green advocates. They're doing it because it's a feature that actually is not a feature for the sake of a feature. It's a feature that's a win-win, right? It typically reduces the power consumption, which makes it more economical to have, buy, and afford. So it helps in the ROI proposition of whatever it is that you're trying to market that consumes power, as well as it provides a nice social win as well. So I mean, that's one of the nice things that I liked about the green space when I got in it was clearly sort of an area where everybody could win in this thing. You can be socially responsible, you can help the corporation, save money, and everything sort of comes together. So ultimately your shareholders are benefiting in two ways.
I mean, I think about for many years, IT didn't necessarily get a seat at the big table. I mean, now in most companies, the CIO gets to sit at the big table, right? Because business realizes that they are a key enabler to making their strategy successful. I mean, I see the exact same thing in this opportunity. Again, I don't think it's led by IT, but I think now IT gets pulled in and gets a seat at that big table, gets to have that discussions, and can contribute in enabling, what we're looking to see here.
I think that's an important point. I mean, because one of the things that we wanted to talk about was sort of, what attracts the next generation to IT careers, right? They think their IT careers are going to sort of be outsourced. They're not really looking forward to IT careers. But I think green is really an example to, again, evolve the role of the CIO in the way that Albert's suggesting, which is you have the seat at the table. Here's an advantage just not on the IT side, but for the overall organization or your institution, where you can put a lot of pieces in play that you can get a lot of visibility for and build a lot of relationships and partnerships within your own organization and across some other ones, which I think is really critical to the CIO role. And I wanted to just, before I stand between you and lunch here, but wanted to ask one question of folks in the room and kind of ask for a show of hands. So if you had to choose between two projects, and one is Energy Star rated and more expensive, and the other is less expensive but not Energy Star rated, how many people in the room are buying the Energy Star rated product? Okay. So, depends what it is.
So, it's the life cycle, right? That's what you're looking at.
So it's a lot of questions with life cycle.
That's what drives me crazy about it, because the incentives are such that it makes sense without the externalities. Business will just do it. And so much of green is related to that. It just would happen as the course of good business. It's some of these other things that I'm not so sure about.
And to drive into it, to really link that, because I think you picked up on this green stuff is an IT leadership moment. And it actually ties to the security thing. An irate CIO from a Fortune 2 company basically once basically asked Scott McNeely at Sun. He says, "When are you going to stop making like insecure software?" And he says, "When you stop buying it." And so we actually, as even in our modified role as a provider, a buyer of services and all that, when we actually insist on these type of things, we can actually shape the destiny.
So with that, we're going to wrap it. Oh, you have one last comment?
I don't want to stand between lunch, but I was just going to say, I'm not with the market leader in infrastructure, so I hear a lot of CIOs tell me, I got to retrain my people, and we got to, it's a different command line interface, and so I see a lot of decisions being made now, even though we all have the right intentions to take the more efficient product. I see customers making decisions where they spend 40% more for equipment when they don't have to. I see them buying equipment which is 30% more energy abusive when they don't have to. So it does come down to choice and looking at what you can get and what it does. So, we're not all as good as we want to think we are.
Well, please join me in thanking the panel.